Chapter 22. Redemption. Lunch ended up being spent in a cheerful atmosphere. Despite my obvious tiredness, the smell of stew that had invaded the house opened my appetite, as much as their presence and Lilith's words had opened my spirit. I felt truly comforted, truly close to them. My fascination with Lilith grew even more, if that was possible, and I could see something similar in Laura's eyes too, although I could tell it confused her. After lunch, they forced me to rest and went for a walk on the beach. I fell asleep on the bed without even realizing it and was awakened by Laura when it was already dark.
Wake up, sleepyhead. Let's have dinner.
I got up still groggy, looked at the mirror above the dresser at the end of the bed, and saw someone there looking quite disheveled. Only then did I realize it was me. I decided to take a quick shower and freshen up a bit. After doing so, I felt new, different, and invigorated. It's amazing what a splash of water over a tired body can do for the spirit. When I got to the kitchen, they were waiting for me to serve dinner. We chatted about trivial things. We praised the cook, Laura, who blushed completely. We joked around. In the midst of it all, I noticed that Laura still seemed confused. I looked at Lilith, who seemed to be reading my thoughts, and with a smile on her face, she simply made a barely perceptible affirmative gesture with her head. I went straight to the point. Beating around the bush would surely lead us nowhere. Laura, how are you feeling?
I feel fine,
she said, smiling, and looked away. I looked at Lilith again, who also smiled.
You know you can say anything, absolutely anything, Laura,
Lilith said, with a tone filled with sincerity. Laura took a sip of wine. She looked at Lilith for some time and then at me. It was obvious that she wanted to speak, but didn't know what to say. Finally, she took a deep breath.
Well, I look at both of you and I wonder how I ended up here. You know, Miguel, yesterday I didn't think you were with anyone. I felt lonely, and it just happened. It wasn't planned or programmed. It happened.
I know.
And Lilith, I had never been with a woman before. In fact, the thought disgusted me a bit, and yet here we both are. It's all very sudden, you know.
We nodded in agreement.
I've been divorced and alone for 4 years, after a not very good marriage. We got married for all the wrong reasons, and it reached a point where it just couldn't go on. I needed space and to breathe. And then I found myself alone and discovered that having space without anyone to share it with is nonsense. Over time, I became more and more lonely, more closed off, and needy. I almost felt like I was begging for attention. And then someone came along who paid attention to me. It was him I was waiting for yesterday. It's not a passion from neither side, but it's something. The moments I spend with him are calm, and I feel better with myself. But I'm still lonely. Yesterday, when the message came saying he wouldn't come at that hour, it was bad, very bad. I needed company, to feel someone. And there you were, Miguel, and on top of that, I recognized you and admire you, and I never thought I would meet you, and you seemed out of place and lonely.
She stopped for a moment, as if trying to organize her thoughts.
Do you understand?
Oh, how I understood. In fact, it didn't seem like I was out of place and lonely. I was out of place and lonely, and angry at some stupidity that I can't even understand anymore. She continued.
We went to bed, and it was good to feel you, but you know, not because of you. It was good to feel someone. And it was good to fall asleep next to someone,
she said with a smile and her eyes starting to fill with tears.
And then you showed up,
she said, turning to Lilith.
I woke up and saw Miguel, but I felt you next to me and got scared. I didn't know what to think. To be honest, the first thing I thought was, what did I get myself into? And I still can't understand the rest of what happened, seriously. I just know that you are fascinating.
I smiled. It's really hard not to find Lilith fascinating, even at a first impression. And I also know that if Laura felt something similar to what I felt when Lilith asked me if I wanted to feel, then I'm sure her universe was shaken. In a good way, but it was shaken. I perfectly understood what she must be going through. I had been confused since I met Lilith and was only now starting to see something through the opaque veil that was my perception. She had revealed herself to me, and I couldn't see her. Both Laura and I were too small to apprehend her, and yet I was increasingly willing to try. Laura continued.
And now I look at the two of you, and I don't know what to feel. But I know I feel good.
I didn't know what to say to her. I decided to take the intelligent approach and say nothing. I just looked at Lilith. Lilith set down the glass that was almost floating in her hand and stood up. Laura stood still, looking at her. Lilith floated the 2 steps that separated her from Laura and sat at the table next to her. She raised her hand and gently caressed Laura's face. Then she lifted her chin gently, so that their eyes met. They both got lost in each other's eyes, in a strange contrast, seeming like mother and daughter, with the mother younger than the daughter, seeming like friends forever, seeming like lovers. I don't dare try to understand what was going through their minds.
You know, child, what makes us women, creatures apart, is the almost infinite capacity we have to love.
She leaned down and kissed her lightly on the forehead.
And the irreducibility of never giving up seeking love.
Laura yielded, without ever taking her eyes off Lilith's. She took her hand, with tears in her eyes. She looked at Lilith, as if she had found herself again. Tears began to run down her face, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of redemption. Somehow, she had understood much faster than me the nature of the person she had in front of her. She hugged her and cried. After some time, Lilith made her stand up, and they hugged each other. They stood like that for a long time, an eternity. I felt privileged to be able to see everything unfolding in front of me with such clarity. Finally, their mouths sought each other calmly, sweetly, without urgency, without haste, with all the time in the world, and Laura's presence itself seemed to grow. When they finally parted, Laura suddenly seemed to remember that I was there, looked at me, smiled somewhat embarrassedly, and tried to wipe the tears from her eyes. I looked at her and smiled back. I felt a genuine happiness for her and a little bit of envy, to be honest. Her condition as a woman made her so much closer to that being I admired so much. I stood up resolute, and approached them. Lilith was still leaning on the table, half sitting, half standing, with the gentlest look I had ever seen in someone's eyes. I looked her straight in the eyes. When you want certainty, asked, she had told me. You can't stop loving, can you? I asked her. A pained smile was my affirmative answer. I pulled her towards me and gave her a kiss, short, sweet, full. Then we looked at Laura, embraced side by side. We stretched out our free arms to her, and she fell into our embrace.